Hello, we are live. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining me. I have this amazing guest, Dr. Nina Loom, who is from IMG Roadmap. She is an extraordinaire who really, her specialty is helping IMGs get into residency programs. So, a lot of my audience are international medical graduates. So, we want to learn all the tips and strategies from Dr. Nina Loom. So, can you introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. I am Nina Loom. I'm from Cameroon in West Africa, and I currently live and work in Ohio. I practice emergency medicine, though I am originally family medicine trained with fellowship training in emergency medicine. So it's my pleasure to be here. I'm an IMG, a proud one, and one that is changing the landscape for those coming after me. I'm a podcaster, a blogger, a content creator, and all the social media things at imgroadmap.com. It's the only place that I utilize to spread the word in helping international medical students and graduates into residency positions across the United States.
Right. Thank you so much for your services. Just thinking back years ago, I wish I had people guiding me because there were so many mistakes that I made and I did not match the first time. So a lot of expensive mistakes. So now let us
Yes.
dive deeper. Okay. As somebody who has gone through this and also helped people, what are the
hmm
biggest challenges you've seen when IMGs face when applying for U.S. residency programs?
So, there's several challenges that an IMG can can encounter when they start this process. And I like to break them down as internal processes and external processes. The external challenges are typically around the lower retention rate for IMGs into residency. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, in my opinion, because if you look at the medical landscape, it was made and created to increase the number of physicians in the United States. But I'm sure the initial intention was to get Americans into these positions to work in their respective hometowns, right? And so when IMGs entered the chat, right, we're
Mhm.
coming into a sort of a well-oiled machine, and we're having to find our place in that system. And so by default, we're not the ideal candidate, right? Because
Mhm.
the ideal candidate is the person who graduated from a United States medical school to fill in that Medicare funded position for residency in order to turn around and serve the American people in a certain locale. So when you look at it that way, it can seem as though the odds are against us because we're not the ideal. Now, that ideal can look like several things for several programs in several different ways. But really, fundamentally, when I think of it that way, I say that's an external challenge, but it doesn't mean that it's impossible. It doesn't
Mhm.
mean that the system is not created for us. But it just means that the default was not necessarily the IMG when the system started. And so coming in, you have to learn what the default is, what the standard is, and then you have to seek ways to mirror that, right? Now, that's one external factor which can translate into maybe a limited number of positions that are offered to international medical students and grads. It can translate into, there are fewer IMGs across the country. Right now, I think 22% of practicing physicians are international medical graduates. And so all these things are just results of being able to or unable to practice in a system that was not originally designed with you in mind, right? So that's an
Mhm.
external challenge. Now, the internal challenge, which I think is actually more paramount and more important, is the challenge that the IMG deals with when they start to think about the process and they
Mhm.
start to address the process. And then they realize that, oh, wow, maybe it's too competitive. Maybe I'm not qualified enough. Maybe I don't have the requirements that I think I should have in order to make myself to stand out or to be a competitive applicant. And that process, I think, is single-handedly one of the key reasons why a lot of IMGs either don't even try, or
Mm,
when they choose to try, they fail. It's because they haven't dealt with that internal challenge. Some call imposter syndrome, or some call negative self-talk, or whatever the case may be. Dealing with that internal voice that shows you why you're not qualified, or tells you how you're not qualified, and being able to move past that. So I think those are the two main challenges. But each of those external, internal challenges can be broken down into so many different parts, right? Like that's just the overarching thing,
mm,
but it could be broken down into external could be okay, limited number of positions, limited number of Medicare funded spots, limited opportunities for IMGs, unfamiliarity with IMGs, right? Lack of institutional backup that the IMG doesn't have when they come into the US system, lack of structure in their education, there's no clear path. So, all of those are external challenges that fall under that rubric of a system that wasn't designed to accommodate IMGs to start with. Even though, granted, over the years, there's been so much change, so much growth, and this steady increase in the number of IMGs that are going into residency every year. It just keeps going up. So the
mhm,
system is adapting to it. Doesn't mean that the system is bad or broken. It just means
mm,
this is how it is, and we are all adapting into it. So I'm not, trying to badge us. I'm not talking down on the system. Anybody's getting in their feelings about this. It's just what it is. Like when the
right,
system
right,
was designed, it wasn't designed for a foreigner to come in and take a position, right? It was
right, right.
designed to increase the number of doctors in the US that are for the US people, by the US people. Um, so I mean that's just something that we encounter. And there are IMGs that are Americans too,
Right, true,
right?
true, true,
So
true.
there's actually a large proportion that are Americans as well, who are, this is home for them. But now they're coming in with the credentials of a foreign medical school, which is not the ideal for the system either, right? The
Mhm.
standard is the US medical school. And so however way you look at it, that's one external factor.
Oh, I love how you're breaking this down into the external and the internal, right? External, you need to know the rules of the game and you play that game,
Yeah.
right? We are taking that piece out, but the more important is the internal piece. How we
Yeah.
going to overcome, and but I think that's where you come in, right? Like help them break
Yeah.
down. Okay, you can do this. So how do you guide IMGs to go through these internal challenges?
Yeah, that's a great question. I wish I had all the answers, right? Because if I had all the answers, I'll just write a book and then refer everybody to that book.
Right.
But, life is dynamic, life is consistently changing, and ERAS is not exempt from that rule. ECFMG is not exempt from that rule. So, and even our lives, we change by the moment. Like things are happening so quickly, so much so that sometimes it's hard to catch up with what all's going on.
Mm,
So what I do is following what I know, following the trends, following experience, following data, and following accounts of international medical graduates who have gone through this process, and compiling those experiences through a podcast.
mm,
I've been able to sit back and say, wait, there's a method to this madness. There is a framework that seems to work for the majority of people who end up being successful in this process. Yes, there's a component of grace, there's a component of favor, there's a component of chance, there's a component of hard work, there's a component of resiliency. But sometimes for the person who is starting out, all they see is overwhelm. All they see is the insurmountable task ahead of them. And I realize, for whatever reason, I think God gave me a gift of being able to teach and being able to understand and break things down for people in a way that they sometimes are just so overwhelmed to see. It's not that they don't know, it's that's not where their focus is. And so I started to use that gift of, character development or self-improvement and apply it in the professional space as a physician, into how can we develop ourselves into the ideal candidate that we
mm,
can make ourselves attractive to programs even when we're not that ideal person, right?
mm,
And so I started to realize that there's a method to it, there's a framework to it, there's a presentation, there's certain skill sets that you need to embody, there's certain character traits that you need to embody. And over I think now 10 years of doing this, I've been able to sit back and say, okay, if you were fresh in the game, new to the system, here's how we're going to approach this. Whether you're an American who went to foreign school or you're a foreign grad who went to um, a foreign school and you're moving to the United States, whether you require a visa or you have a green card,
Mm-hmm.
this 7 steps, if you can apply them, then here's how you could create a successful medical outcome for yourself. And through trial and error, right? So putting other medical students and graduates through this process, I was able to develop a program that allows for them to be able to not only grow professionally, but grow in their personal development as well, in a way that allows them to be able to build this competitive portfolio that they seek.
Mm,
So I mean, the long of the short is there's a process, and not everybody fits that. Not everybody has the same background, qualifications. We're not all coming in with the same CV, right? But we're trying to mimic or mirror the ideal candidate for each of these specialties that we're applying to, each of these programs we're applying into. And so what I do is I help people as a coach to identify where their best efforts should be, where they should focus their attention and how they can make themselves more competitive.
I love this. So, when you were talking about the self development, it's also a really important point that I want to highlight to everybody who's listening.
Yeah.
It's not just that the goal is not just getting into residency, it's about thriving. Because
Yeah.
when you get there, you are learning a completely new system. And if you don't learn, like you don't embody that sort of, I'm going to practice this in American system, you are going to go back to your old ways and you're not going to fit. So just to briefly tell about my background, I did my internship, medical officer. Like I have like 4 or 5 years of experience back in Malaysia. And when I came out, I was going to be a piece of cake. Oh my gosh, it was completely different. I had to relearn everything. So it's kind of a humble pie. Having that kind of self-development piece, like what Dr. Loom is saying, is so important. Like we want to thrive later. So
Yeah, I think, I like what you said, it's humble pie because, yeah, I really agree with that because there's a lot that comes into play when you are growing in your career, and even though, a lot of people don't think that they're at the point that they should focus on their personal development because that's not what they're seeking out. They're seeking
mhm,
a career growth experience,
right.
but it really starts with your personal development
Mm,
first.
yeah.
Um, and whether you see it or not, or whether you identify it or not, that is where the rubber meets the road. Like
Mhm,
that's really where the process starts. But and I get a lot of students who come into my program because, hey, I want to match it to residency. But by the time they leave, they tell me what I've gained here is more important than just the fact that I match. Yeah, you get your goal,
mhm,
but that personal development piece is what's going to keep you excelling in residency. It's
mm,
what's going to keep you thriving on difficult days. It's what's going to keep you from burnout. It's what's going to keep you from getting into fellowship. It's what's going to it's what's going to help you get into fellowship. It's what's going to help you be great on your job when you start your new job down the road as an attending. And 10 years, 5 years, 4 years, you decide you want to do private practice, that those personal development skills are what will keep you going
mhm,
and excelling through those other parts of your life.
right.
It's amazing what personal development can do for a person.
Mm. And now you were talking about the internal side. What about external? Do you have like, what are the main 5 things that they need to overcome to get into residency?
Yeah, so external, let's start with the most important thing is the examinations, okay?
Mm,
The United States Medical Licensure Examination is sort of the measuring rod for who has proven objectively that they are able to, one, understand medical knowledge, basic sciences, and clinical skill sets of what it takes to practice medicine in the United States. So that's the first thing. Now, because that's an objective standard, as people in academics as well, highly professional individuals that we are as physicians, we all understand what scores and what numbers do for rankings a person according to merit, right? We all understand the influence of merit in academics. And as a result, scores will remain a huge aspect in that external list of things that facilitate an IMG's entrance into residency. Having not only just the passing score, but a competitive passing score
Mm,
makes a big difference in creating distinction between me and the next person. As we advance in our career, that may look like board certification, it may look like where we went to residency, it may look at like different things. But at this stage in your career, scores are your number one. So your number one external factor that I know keeps IMGs outside of the gate, so to speak,
mhm, mhm,
is low or poor performance
mm,
on examination. Now, to that same token, failure on those examination or on those exams are also considered strongly by certain specialties as well in certain specific programs. So low performance, poor performance, both are key items that the IMG must be cognizant of when they're starting the process. There is no conversation around getting to residency that doesn't evolve around your scores.
yeah,
There's
yeah,
just not.
right, right.
So that's the first step, right? Now, that's the first external factor is your scores. The second external factor, which whether we agree or not, right? We don't like to think of medicine as a place where there's nepotism or
Mhm,
a space where, there is any chance for favoritism and things like that. But who you know also goes a long way in medicine. Why? That is part of the human connection. It's part of the humankind, right? That the people you know will influence the rooms that you walk into. So, point in case, I'm on your podcast right now because we've met each other somewhere,
mhm,
somehow, and
right.
we've now gotten to know about one another. I would never be on your podcast if you had no idea of who I was,
Mhm,
and vice versa. You've been on my podcast before.
mhm,
And if I didn't know about the work you were doing in research, I wouldn't have had any inclination to want to speak with you,
mm,
right?
right.
But you had been doing your work before we met, and your work was able to speak for you before we met.
Mm,
Take that same example as to who you know in the medical space. You keep doing your work. So you keep working on your research, you keep working
mm,
on your whatever you're doing, okay?
mhm,
Practicing in your country, whatever you're doing, you keep doing that. But simultaneous with that, you're making connections in the academic space. And then your work is going to speak for you when you have made those connections already. So I think the mistake is, sometimes as highly motivated professionals in a system that is based off of merit, we talked about
mm,
scores being our
mhm,
merit. We think that that's all that it takes to make us stand out, right? We
mhm,
think that if we just get the 5, 6, 7 publications, we're good. But if those publications are not taken to a certain stage, if those publications are not being talked about in a certain circle, being published in a certain journal, if you're not presenting that poster at every conference that would want to hear about it, it's as good as on your computer.
mhm, right.
So who gets to meet your publication is what makes it different. If
Mm,
NJM picks it up, it's a big deal. If nobody picks it up, it's not a big deal.
right, right, right.
Who you know makes a big difference. But the person you know is just going to be an addition to your academic work, your meritable work in your scores, and also in your whatever you've accumulated in the back end research, publications, a prior clinical experience, whatever your background carries. But who you know is a huge external factor. And that's what distinguishes us from American grads is they have their institutions to back them up.
Mm-hmm.
There's no question when you come and you say, "Hey, I graduated from Berkeley," right? Oh, I know where that is. Your experience is valid because everybody knows about it.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're a foreign grad, nobody knows about what you went to med school. Your
Mm.
experience is not quite valid yet. You have to prove it. So who you know can be one step in proving your or validating your experiences here. I think those are two good external points that we can expand on tonight.
Am I reading between your lines that you need to have social media presence? Am I reading like am I
Are you
is that
making this up, or is that really what I'm saying? So I think that social media is a great asset for all of us in medicine today. However, I still believe in person. It's not in person media, in person, building in person connections.
Mhm. Right?
Because social media stands the risk of getting abused,
Mm.
it stands the risk of being quickly ignored, it stands the risk of sounding like everybody else, especially with bots and stuff now. That I would strongly urge not to minimize in person connections, but social media is great. I mean, I think it is probably a very easy way to build such connections.
Mm.
But I also want to caution that you make a much better impact in person than you do on social media.
Mm. Okay.
So social media could be like the opening act.
Right.
Social media could be the first step. Social media could be where it starts, but it shouldn't end on social media. It should
Mm.
translate from med Twitter to I got to work with you and I feel differently after I worked with you. So,
Right.
yeah, social media is vital. It's important.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, there are people who are making careers out of social media these days.
Mm-hmm.
The future is probably going to be more social media driven, to be honest. Um, but do not neglect the power of in person, especially when everyone else is going to a social media.
Mm-hmm.
This may be your opportunity to create professional connections with physicians in person, especially with the
Mm.
pandemic kind of closing out.
So how do IMGs? I think I get this question a lot. Like, oh, I'm from India. I'm from somewhere else. I try to email them and people are ignoring. How do we get that connection? They feel like they can't find a way in. Like, do you have a special strategy or tip for that?
Yeah, yeah. I think that's a great question because it's something that I also go in depth with and teach my students that I coach is a lot of us have bad manners.
Mm.
I'm going to just say that right.
Oh, yes.
We have really
Right.
bad manners. A lot of us do not understand the concept of respect, the concept of personal space, the concept of boundaries,
Mm-hmm.
the concept of um, having good character. And good character will show itself in your email. It would show itself in your text message.
Mm-hmm.
It would show itself in your level of entitlement when
Mm.
you write. It would show itself in your demand. You're not owed anything by anybody. Nobody is mandated to mentor you, to coach you, or to give you any piece of advice. If they choose to do so, that's their choice. So I started by answering that question in stating these things because as someone who's on the internet, I've seen it all.
Right.
However, in and it goes back to what we were talking about earlier in the personal development portion of things. If you haven't worked on that aspect of yourself, your networking technique or scheme is not you're not going to fill in the blanks.
Mm.
Okay. I've had students who've come to my program and they just, oh, give me the template. They want the email template. They want this. It doesn't work like that. You could take my email templates and send them, and nothing's going to happen
Mm-hmm.
because you didn't put any character in it.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't understand the concept of manners. You didn't understand the concept of boundaries. And you
Right.
didn't understand human psychology.
Mm.
So instead of giving you a list of things, if you're watching right now and you're like, okay, so what do I write? I can't tell you what to write because this is not something that you just copy and paste. You have to have first done that introspective work on yourself. Develop a relationship and understanding with who you are, of who you are. And then you can translate that in your professional interactions, understanding the receiver's boundaries, allowing them to give you permission into their space
Mm.
before you position yourself for an ask. And because you're asking for favors, your tone definitely matters. Your choice of words definitely count. Your presentation must be top notch. And the psychology in which you're asking or writing that request or writing that tweet or writing that email must be one that follows the basic tenets of human relationships. So you're going to address them with respect.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to ask them for permission before you present your ask. I think the sin of social media is there are no boundaries, right?
Right. Right.
Like your profile is open, everybody can just email you.
Yeah, that's that your opening statement, many people have no manners, is like a mic drop moment. Like the amount of emails I get and the sense of entitlement, like what you said, I want like emails I get. I want you to mentor me. You want
Yeah,
me to want me to mentor you?
right. You
I
want
drop
me to
Right.
mentor
I will
you.
drop all my things to invest my time with you. I don't know what they do. I don't know what they're good at. I don't know if they're even interested in my field of research, but they want me to mentor them. So I love this because as we switch from, as you say, asking for favor, the tone matters, and kind of building the respect and trying to build the connection. So anybody, this is a complete deep dive into self-development. We are talking about residency, but this is just basic for medicine. If you can't even connect with your mentors, you can't even connect with your colleagues, how are you going to connect with patients? So this is so key.
Yeah.
Thanks for that.
Yeah. And I think that the mistake is we think, well, I just want to know, I just want to know what I need to do for residency. I don't want to hear the other stuff.
Mm.
Maybe you're listening to the wrong podcast,
Right.
right?
I guess you could look at a blog and look at the list.
Right, right. Or maybe you could find another resource.
Mm.
And I think that's something that I've had to learn, because at first I would always want to answer everybody's questions and make sure everybody's happy. But then I realized that I was not solving their problems in the long term. Because when you do this for a while, you realize this person is still not getting results.
Mm.
I've told them everything they need to do. Oh, but how are they actually applying this?
Mm-hmm.
What framework are they using? That's why it's not working.
Mm-hmm.
Because you just told them what to do and they just did what you said to do. They didn't apply character, they didn't apply respect, they didn't
Mm-hmm.
involve their manners, they weren't considerate, no boundaries. And then they think, oh wow, I'm just gonna swipe this thing from our social media and post it here and that should take care of it.
Mm.
I
Right.
wish it was that easy,
Yeah.
you know.
So I want to switch gear a little bit.
Yeah.
How when you're working with so many people, like over the 10 years, how important is research experience for IMGs into getting into residency program? Is it that important, or just only a small piece?
So I love this question. And before we came on the call, I was actually, pitching you to come by and teach some of my students in the course about just basic clinical work, scholarly activity.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because, research is such a huge aspect of the application.
Mm.
Especially because, you know, if you look back, there's no clear cut rule that says you must have research,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, if any program lists research on their website, they'll usually say something like research experience is preferred,
Okay. Okay.
right? It's never mandatory. However,
Mm-hmm.
in the real world of medicine, how do we practice on a day to day? How do we make clinical decisions? How do we answer pertinent questions at the bedside for our patients? How do we deliver quality care to the humans that have been entrusted to us to save them from death's call, right? We do so by implementing someone else's research to
Mm-hmm.
answer the question of our patient. So, you know, should our patients take lisinopril over HGTZ?
Mm-hmm.
Well, you could give them both. You can give them either, but you use the research to say what comorbidities do they have?
Mm-hmm.
Why would this be better for them in their renal disease over this? Or why would
Mm-hmm.
this be better for this person considering the renal disease over this? How do we make those assumptions? They're not assumptions, right? They're all based on research. So, because research is so fundamental in how we care for patients, I think it is imperative for anyone who is trying to prove distinction in his specialty to have some type of objective standard of showing the programs that they are able to implement research in the clinical setting.
Mm-hmm.
Whether is that they have an understanding of making interpretations of research articles, or whether is that they have the expertise of authoring research articles, or whether is that they have some collateral experience in assisting in research articles, that is where I think fundamentally we make a difference for patient care is by a lot of us extrapolate from research and then some of us actually carry out the research.
Mm-hmm.
So you have those of us at the bedside that are implementing the researchers' work. And then you have those of us that are the researchers writing the papers, spending the time in the lab, doing the numbers, running the biostats, running the models, and identifying the answers for us. So when you look at residency application and you go through every single specialty and you look at the matched versus the unmatched, and you look at the research column, this is available information through
Mm-hmm.
NRMP. You look at the research column. There are certain specialties that have a higher regard for research experience than others,
Mm-hmm.
primarily the surgical specialties, but even the medical specialties do highly regard research, especially if it's high quality research.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you look at that, you can almost say if every applicant is bringing an average of 3, 4 research driven work or papers, then who am I as an IMG not to present anything,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Right.
Especially when this is becoming sort of a quasi objective standard of
Mm-hmm.
my understanding of care delivery, whether as a clinician or as a researcher. And there are some of us that are going to go all 9 yards and author randomized controlled trials and spend years working on different things. Some of us are going to be doing meta analysis, systematic reviews. And then there's going to be the other smaller proportion that didn't get to participate in RCT, didn't get to go through an IRB process, didn't get to do maybe higher quality research or get recognized by large name publication and journals. But it's still imperative upon us to prove our understanding of research because there's no career in medicine that doesn't involve, or in science that
Mm-hmm.
doesn't involve research.
Right.
So until we shift as IMGs from looking at it as I'm just here to check a box, I'm
Mm-hmm.
just here to get a paper because I think I need to have a paper, we start looking at it as how is this going to influence the trajectory of my career down the road beyond residency, and then applying research or participating in research then not only to get that mean of 3 to 4 papers that everybody seems to have as an American grad or other IMG, or just check a box.
Mm-hmm.
It's understanding that fundamentally this is speaking for me in more than one way. So
Mm-hmm.
the summary is your research experience will speak for you in demonstrating your understanding of the clinical specialty you're applying into. It would also demonstrate your commitment to that specialty you're applying into. It will also be a method of showing that you can apply other people's research at the bedside because you've written one or two yourself.
Mm. I love
And
this.
and so it's breaking down how qualified you are for a program by showing the work that you've done.
Hmm. So it's a more meta concept, not just as you say, a checkbox. Is the thing you do. And also I would add one more thing is when you do a research project, you're asking questions, which
Mhm.
is fundamentally what medicine is. You're asking questions and how to solve them. If you don't know how to ask questions, you're never going to apply evidence-based medicine. So it's like a bar you need to set for yourself in order to be part of this scholarly process to get into
Yep.
medicine. That way, you become a truly a rounded doctor. So thanks for that.
I agree. I agree. Like the research is all about answering pertinent questions that make a difference in
Hmm.
the clinical landscape. Whether and I think that's probably um it's the most overwhelming concept, but also the simplest concept as well, right? Because your question could be anything. Your question could be, is this superior to this? Or it could be something completely unrelated to superiority or inferiority, but it's a comparison of, like, I don't know. I'm trying to think of something completely bizarre as an example, but it can vary from anything, right? From
Hmm.
I'm proving the superiority of this, I'm proving that this is nonsense, right? Or I'm proving that this is right and this is wrong, or this is better and this
Hmm.
is not. But, however the case may be, your research is also speaking to the kind of person that you are,
Hmm.
especially when an employer who is a program director or a, selection committee at a residency program, when they're looking at that, it's just not, oh, wow, you did research. It's what your research is saying about you,
Yes.
is what your research is able to show about you. Wow, you took the time to do this and you were a part of this project. Oh, it's showing your commitment,
Hmm.
hard work. It's showing your resiliency. It's showing how analytical you are, your critical thinking. You were the first author. Oh, wow. Like, that takes a lot of
Hmm.
work.
Hmm. Yeah.
So it's just not, I'm going to check a box because it makes me competitive. How is it making you stand out? It's because it's demonstrating these skill sets that subconsciously, even people in the selection committee are looking for, but they sometimes can't overtly express it, right? It's like, why are we attracted to the person with 10 publications? Is
Hmm.
it because 10 publications is great?
Yeah.
No, it's because it speaks to that person's character. It speaks to that person's critical thinking skills. It speaks to that person's innovative ideas. It speaks to who they are fundamentally and the kind of mind that it takes to involve yourself in that much work. And then I'm thinking, wow, well, if I'm running a science a department here and we want to encourage research in our department, guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to hire the person who has proven to me that they have that
Mhm.
mindset.
Yeah. Right. Right. And right, it's the transferable skills. If you can show your commitment, doing extra things from what's expected, I can see the quality when you join the residency program.
Hmm.
Right. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you're right. It's 100% transferable skills. It's like, oh, you did this before residency. I wonder what you would do now when you get trained by us. Like, that's what they're thinking
Hmm.
subconsciously. You know?
Hold on a second. Doing live streams. Sorry, my daughter is making some chair noises. Okay, so anyway, we're back. What advice do you have for IMGs to increase the chance of getting interviews?
That's a good one. Oh my gosh. So we'll go back to the very beginning, which was where we were talking about external and internal factors. So now that the IMG listing, you've heard the external factors, you've heard some of the external factors, some of the internal factors. You definitely want to work on those things. So you
Mm-hmm.
definitely want to work on a competitive USMLE performance. You definitely want to work on a building a network of um, whether it's mentors, advisors, people that can lead you down the right path. You definitely want to also work on the internal things that are maybe subconsciously holding you back. Um, and that imposter syndrome and the voices that you've been reading on the blogs and the websites and all the your past traumatic experiences as well that prevent you from sort of excelling in the path that you've chosen. So I think your first step is your USMLE work. Your second step is building the right people in your on your side to be able to stand out. And then your third is working on the internal roadblocks that you're fighting with, the things that are preventing you from moving forward in your career. I think we're having some technical glitches. Dr. Gia's camera went off. I'm just going to peruse the comments to see if she's there, if there's anything else we can do differently.
All right, sorry about that. My computer stopped, but we're back. Just okay,
All
we're
right. Yeah.
back.
Here we go.
Sorry, computer problems, right? Anyway, so you were giving this beautiful story about how to get into interview.
Yeah, yeah. So I was talking about interviews, and I was, what I was basically saying was, let's take it back to the very beginning of our conversation, right? Because I think sometimes it's, people come on these podcasts or listen, right? You're listening and you just want to give me 5 steps, just give me the answer. I just want to get the answer and get out of here, right? And they don't realize that it's not that straightforward. It's not that easy. If it was easy, you would have already done it by now.
Hmm.
And so we have to always go back to the root cause, right? Like, let's do a root cause analysis, which we've done. Like, what are the things that stop us from getting into residency? Well, we've talked about external factors, talked about internal factors. We broke down the external factors in the sense that there are few positions for all the applicants, even for from United States medical schools. So once you add an IMG into the picture, it only makes it even more competitive.
Hmm.
And the reason residency is competitive is because there are fewer positions and there are many more applicants. And the
Hmm.
more IMGs apply, the more competitive it would get, right? And so when you look at those external factors, then your question is, how do I overcome them? And one of the key external factors that we talked about earlier was, how do we move past our performance on the USMLE? How do we perform extremely well on the USMLE so that we can stand out with our performance on at least now the CK portion of the exam? That's your first step. Because if you can show distinction, then you can at least be singled out from the competition as the person who has exhibited like a large amount, like you really stand out, like you've shown and proven your distinction. Okay, you go over here, right? So your USN performance is your one objective standard for distinction. Your second step, which is also external, is building that connection and building this network of other physicians and individuals that can help you along the way. And then the internal part, which is actually really more important, but nobody wants to hear that first,
Mm-hmm.
is working on yourself and identifying the internal rhetoric that you've chosen to believe about your performance and yourself and your competitiveness and what's possible for you and what's not possible for you. And then you need to first debunk those things and work around them, which usually is a painful process because it involves change. It involves creating new habits. It involves, okay, if I want to be that kind of person, I have to cut off this and add this, right? I have to spend less time doing this and more time doing this.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you implement not necessarily just like a checklist of here are the 5 things I must do to get into residency, but you look at it more like, hey, okay, here are the external factors that hold me back. Here are the internal factors that hold me back. And then you start to, you know, work on each of those items line by line by line.
Mm-hmm.
I can show some distinction in my USMLE performance. I can make my overall application stand out. I can show my commitment to the specialty by doing some research, some clinical experiences in them. I can create a network that allows me to get some really competitive LORs. I can work on myself and the stories I'm telling myself so that I can be better positioned to create connections in a professional setting that would actually benefit my career. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you look at all those things and you're like, okay, that's what I need to do. Not necessarily you need to get 10 LORs, 5 research. People want those types of answers, but that's not the right answer.
I love this. So, any final words? Like, can you tell us, how, what are the resources they can get from you, how to work with you, how to connect with you? If it, especially for residents who want to, no, I mean, people who want to get into residency or know somebody who wants to get there.
So I think the biggest resource I want to share with everyone is my podcast. It's called the IMG Roadmap Podcast. So the point is it's a GPS. So it's sort of like, when you're trying to get to a certain destination, you get in your car and you plug in the address of your endpoint in your GPS and it
Mm-hmm.
takes you where you're going, right? I
Mm.
remember when I went to buy my car when I finished residency in 2015, I was obsessed with the fact that I wanted a Mercedes, right? It's my first attending job, my first job in America. I'm like, I want a badass car. And so I went and I signed a big fat loan on a car, which is actually funny when I think about it now. But one of the things they asked me when I went to get the car was, do you want the navigation system? And I asked, how much did I give you? And they're like $200 a month or something like that for a subscription. And I was just like, no, thank you. I'll use my phone.
Mm-hmm.
And so every time I get in my car now, I use my phone as my GPS. And it's as easy as plugging in the address and I get to where I need to go. Um, and so my podcast is sort of like your phone, where you have your GPS on your phone and you're trying to get to general surgery and you go on there and you find stories of interviews and podcasts pertinent to general surgery. And I'm just who have been there, telling you exactly what they did so that you can get to where they are.
Mm.
On the flip side, I also have that $200 navigation system, right? Which is like the one they were trying to upsell me on,
On your
the expensive one.
Mercedes.
So I have sort of a school, which is okay, the podcast is not good enough for you. Let's get you that hands-on VIP service navigation system inside the IMG Roadmap program, which is an online virtual training platform where we work on all these aspects we've talked about, these external things and the internal things as well. And the transformation that happens in there ends up being twofold. And for some odd reason, every time a student or a physician graduates from my program and completes it and they match, the email or the feedback I get from them is usually, I'm so happy I matched, quite all right. But they always tell me that that internal change that happened for them is what they're taking on with them into residency.
Mm.
So that's why I say, yeah, you're going to get the here's what to do on the podcast, but the transformation that allows you to apply what we're sharing with you happens in the school. So the podcast is on Apple, Spotify, Google, YouTube even. We're right here on
Mm.
YouTube. Just type in the IMG Roadmap podcast on YouTube and you'll find it. And IMG stands for International Medical Graduate. Roadmap is basically that road, with the podcast being your GPS taking you where you need to go. So come, come listen to us, listen to the stories of other people who have been where you're at. And if you need that hand holding, then we have the Mercedes experience inside the IMG Roadmap School as well.
So I
So
have a plug. I have a plug for both. First, I've listened to the podcast, and the best thing about podcasts is that you're not only listening from Dr. Loom, but you're listening from everybody. So all the different IMG experiences, and there will be somebody who you can relate to, because you may not relate to my story, you may not relate to Dr. Loom's, but you may find somebody like, oh, I'm exactly at this place, and all, that is one person I needed to hear from, and that's like the beauty of podcasts. And my
yeah,
second plug is for courses, and I'm a big proponent of courses because time is money. People always, it's like, is it worth? You decide what outcome you decide the return of investment. You join a course because you want to shrink that time so that you can get to residency. How much heartache, how much time and costly mistakes are you willing to make to get into residency? So that's a
yeah,
question you want to ask
yeah,
yourself, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And I think that that's a great concept to talk about, because there's this notion in the international medical space, right,
Mm-hmm.
that all this process is supposed to be handed to us without like any extra work,
Mm-hmm.
or without even making the investment into the process. So, what do I mean by that? Our IMG community is comparing against the American medical graduate community, right? And I don't mean comparing in a bad way. It's not a fight. It's not a
Mm-hmm.
competition, right? It's just a matter of there are 3,000 or 34,000 spots in the United States for residencies across all specialties. And maybe there are 40,000 applicants each year. So by default, at least 6K people on average are going to be left out, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Some people don't sign their list, some people fall out, different things happen. But you're looking at least 2K that continued on to the end that did not get into residency. So that's what I mean by competition. But, the American grad that gets maybe the preference for a position, it's not without effort also. Like, let's acknowledge the work that they have done. They're very qualified,
Mm-hmm.
right? They have the institutional backup, they have mentors that are, speaking for them in places that they maybe cannot get in on their own. But they've also paid a big price. They've also paid a price of $250,000 in debt for medical school, $300,000 in debt.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of us IMGs are coming in with, maybe, I'm not saying it was easy for us to go to med school wherever we went to, because for me, med school in Cameroon would have been the equivalent of, maybe $1,000 a year at
Mm-hmm.
most. But that would have been very difficult for my family to still put together, right? So, however, yes, we've paid a price, but these people have also paid a price.
Yeah.
And so if you are coming in and you have to pay for a course or a program to facilitate your entry, then look at it as such. It's an investment that facilitates a process for you, which is way cheaper than what your competition has had to invest in.
Yeah.
Now, whether that could look like, hey, I'm a foreign grad and I don't have all these things that I know I need to have. And so I take a research course, or I take a review course for USMLE,
Mm-hmm.
or I take a course on preparing myself for residency application, like the one that I offer, or I take a Pathoma, I buy Pathoma, or buy whatever courses that you're buying. Those are all courses,
Mm-hmm.
right? But for some odd reason, we feel like we shouldn't have to invest in those things, which I don't understand why, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you're basically gathering these experiences, gathering this expertise in a short period of time. You're avoiding mistakes that other people have made. You're basically paying a fee to avoid a costly mistake, accelerating your success into whatever you're seeking as your medical career outcome. And you're still paying a much lower price in the grand scheme of things. Yes, to
Hmm.
you, it may feel like it's insurmountable, it may feel big,
Hmm.
but look at it as this investment is still worthwhile. It's still a part of maybe what I would have been paying if I'd gone to med school here, but much lower.
Hmm.
But it's something that would allow me to avoid 1 year of making the same mistakes and then losing 1 year of income that I could have been obtaining because I was already in residency.
Yeah. Yes. Yes and yes. So I missed my first match. So I completely feel it, the pain, the heartache, and the
Yeah.
extra flight tickets to do observership,
Yeah.
having no money after a year. So I just want to end by saying thank you so much. And so I will put all the links later. I'll update to include the podcast link and also all Dr. Loom's social media profile. Thank you so much for all your wisdom. This is a super deep dive. A lot of my videos are much short form, very, very helpful because we want to look at the big picture thing and not just a checkbox. So thank you so much again.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate being here.
All right. Have a good day, everybody. Take care.